The morning of September the 22nd, 2025 started the way most Monday mornings do in Queens, New York. Quiet streets, early light, the sound of a sanitation truck making its way through another neighborhood, another route, another ordinary workday. Two city workers were running a cleanup along a wooded stretch near 149th Avenue and Brookville Boulevard, a marshy, overgrown patch of land sitting in the shadow of John F. Kennedy International Airport. Plains above, trees below, a road that most people drive past without a second thought. They were not supposed to find anything unusual that morning. They were supposed to run their route, move to the next block, clock out, and go home. But one of them caught a smell, and that smell stopped everything. On the ground, tucked into the edge of the wooded area, was a blue and black moving blanket, wrapped tight, tied down with yellow rope. Something large was inside, something that should not have been there. They stopped the truck. They got closer, and what they found inside that blanket was not something you walk away from unchanged. It was a human torso, female, dismembered, no head, no arms, no legs, just the torso of a woman, wrapped up and left in the dirt like she meant nothing. Like she had no name, no children, no mother sitting on the other side of the world, picking up a phone that never rang back. By the time those two sanitation workers made that discovery on that September morning, 68 days had already passed since the night this woman was last seen alive. 68 days. And the man who had shared her bed, her home, and her last known evening alive had already gone back to his regular life. Working, sitting on his porch in the summer heat, moving through his days with the kind of calm that should have been impossible for an innocent man. But it was not impossible for him, because he knew exactly where she was. Her name was Salisha Ali. She was 33 years old. She had 3 children who needed her. She had a mother who loved her. She had a job she showed up to every single morning, until the morning she couldn't. And she deserved so much more than what was waiting for her inside that house in South Ozone Park. This is her story, and I need you to stay with it all the way to the end, because every detail matters, every date matters, and the way this case broke open matters for every person who has ever loved someone they couldn't protect from distance. You're watching Shadow Case Files. We bring the truth to the cases that live in the shadows, the ones wrapped in silence, buried in grief, and left for the people who love the victim to carry alone. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications. We cover true crime, domestic violence cases, and the stories that the headlines skim past. Every case we cover is verified. Every story we tell is real. And every victim we name deserves to have their name said out loud. Now let's go back to the beginning. To understand what happened to Salisha Ali, you have to understand who she was before any of this began. Because the woman at the center of this case was not defined by the way she died. She was defined by the way she lived, by the choices she made, the love she carried, and the future she was working toward. Salisha Ali was Guyanese, born and raised in Guyana, a country on the northeastern coast of South America that most people in the United States could not point on a map without pausing first. Guyana is a place of deep community ties, extended families, and a culture where mothers sacrifice everything for the generation coming up behind them. It is a place where people know their neighbors, where roots run deep, and where leaving, really leaving, crossing oceans, starting over in a foreign country, is not a decision made lightly. Salisha made that decision. She was a mother of 3. 3 children who called her their home base. 3 kids who woke up in the morning knowing that whatever else was uncertain in their world, their mother was the constant. She was the one building, planning, sacrificing, grinding, not for herself alone, but for them. Always for them. People who knew Salisha described her as someone who kept her word, who did not shy away from hard work, and who had her eyes on something more. Not luxury, not excess, just stability, just a life where her children did not have to wonder what tomorrow looked like. That is not a complicated dream. That is the most human dream there is. And in 2023, an opportunity came. A man named Rupchan Simbu arrived in Trinidad and Tobago on a visit. He was in his mid-70s, a Trinidadian-born man who had built a life in New York. He had a home. He had a routine. He had the kind of settled American life that looked, from the outside, like exactly the kind of foundation Salisha was searching for. The age gap between them was more than 40 years. That is not a small detail to pass over. 40-plus years is a generational divide so wide that when Rupchan Simbu was a grown adult navigating the world, Salisha Ali had not yet been born. When he was raising his own generation, she was a child. And now, in 2023, he was presenting himself to her as a partner, as someone who could offer her what she needed. Now, adults make their own choices. That is not in dispute here. But the context around those choices matters enormously. And the context here is this. Salisha Ali was a single mother in her early 30s with 3 children, depending on her, living in a country with limited pathways to the kind of future she was trying to build. And Rupchan Simbu was an older man with legal status in the United States, a home already established in Queens, and the ability to serve as her immigration sponsor. What Salisha was accepting was not just a relationship. It was a lifeline. That distinction between choosing a partner and accepting a pathway is one that would echo through every chapter of what came next. Because understanding why Salisha made the choices she made requires understanding that she was not naive, not reckless, and not blind. She was a mother doing what mothers do. She was trading certainty for hope. She was betting on a future for her children using the options that were available to her. And the man on the other side of that bet already knew exactly what he was offering and what he intended to take. In 2024, Salisha Ali packed her life in a luggage and boarded a plane to New York. She landed in Queens, the most ethnically diverse urban area on the planet, a borough of immigrants and dreamers and people who came from everywhere and built something out of nothing. A place where Guyanese communities have deep roots, where Caribbean culture runs through the streets, where a woman from Guyana could find her people, find community, find her footing. She moved into the home that Rupchan Simbu was renting on 135th Street in South Ozone Park, a quiet residential block. First floor of a row house. Nothing flashy, nothing remarkable, just a neighborhood block where people went about their lives, nodded at their neighbors, and mowed their lawns on weekends. They got married that same year. And from the outside, from the perspective of the neighbors who passed them on the street, who saw them on the porch during those long summer evenings, the picture looked ordinary. Neighbor Terrence Dwerica, who lived directly across the street, would later describe what he saw during those months before everything unraveled. He recalled seeing the couple together on the porch in the summer heat, just existing. 2 people sharing space, sharing an evening, looking for all the world like a regular couple in a regular neighborhood. But Salisha Ali was not just sitting on a porch waiting for her new life to arrive. She found a job in Brooklyn. She was waking up every morning, getting herself together, and traveling out of Queens to go to work. She was doing exactly what she came to America to do. She was building independence, building income, building the foundation that would eventually let her bring her children over. That fact matters more than it might seem in this moment. Salisha Ali was employed. She had a workplace, a schedule, people who expected to see her. She was not isolated, not completely cut off, not entirely dependent. She had created a thread, a thin but real thread, connecting her to the outside world. And that thread would end up being one of the first indicators that something had gone terribly wrong. Because on the morning of July the 14th, 2025, Salisha Ali did not show up for work. She was not late. She did not call in. She simply was not there. And she would never be there again. The evening of July the 13th, 2025 is where this timeline anchors. According to the charges filed by the Queens District Attorney's Office and the investigation conducted by the NYPD, on that evening, Rupchan Simbu and Salisha Ali were both present inside the home on 135th Street in South Ozone Park. That is the last confirmed moment Salisha Ali was alive. No verified sighting after that. No call, no message, no check-in from a friend who saw her at a corner store or heard her voice through a neighbor's wall. The evening of July the 13th was the end of the timeline for Salisha Ali, and the beginning of a nightmare that her family 8,000 miles away would not fully understand for another 8 months. Now, think about what July the 13th looked like from inside that house. Salisha had been in America for less than a year. She was still finding her feet in a foreign country. Her 3 children were still in Guyana, waiting. Her mother was in contact from a distance, doing what mothers do when they can't be physically present. Calling, checking in, holding on to the sound of a familiar voice across the miles. We do not know exactly what happened inside that house on the evening of July the 13th. The investigation has not revealed those details publicly, and the case has not yet gone to trial. What investigators believe is that Salisha Ali was killed that night, murdered inside the home she shared with her husband. The medical examiner later ruled her death a homicide. How exactly she died was not released publicly. What was confirmed is that the cause of death was homicidal violence. Someone in that house chose to end her life. And then that same person made a series of deliberate, calculated decisions about what to do next. Those decisions tell you everything you need to know about the kind of premeditation investigators believe was involved. Because what came after July the 13th was not the act of a panicked person. It was not chaos or impulse or a terrible accident spiraling out of control. It was a plan. On the morning of July the 14th, 2025, the day after Salisha was last seen alive, her employer in Brooklyn was waiting for her. She did not come. Nobody could reach her that day. Family members began trying her phone and getting nothing back. The silence was unusual. Salisha was someone who stayed in contact with her mother, with relatives, with the people in her life. A full day of radio silence was not her pattern. But one day became 2 days. 2 days became a week. And during that week, something significant was happening that the people trying to reach Salisha had no way of knowing about. According to investigators, on July the 14th, the morning after she was last seen alive, Rupchan Simbu's phone was placing him somewhere very specific. The Life 360 application installed on his phone was logging his GPS coordinates in real time. And on July the 14th, those coordinates placed him at the Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge, a remote, marshy, heavily wooded stretch of protected land off Cross Bay Boulevard in Broad Channel, Queens. An area bordered by dark water and dense vegetation, south of the North Channel Bridge. The kind of place that most people in Queens drive past without ever stopping. Remote, isolated, the kind of place where you could go and be completely alone. The following day, July the 15th, his GPS coordinates placed him at a completely different location, near 149th Avenue and Brookville Boulevard in the Rosedale section of Queens. Another stretch of marshy, wooded land near the edge of Idlewild Park, sitting in the flight path of JFK International Airport. 2 remote outdoor locations. 2 consecutive days. The day after his wife was last seen alive. Investigators would later understand exactly why he had been to both of those places on those 2 specific days. But in July of 2025, that data was sitting on a phone in a dead woman's husband's pocket while he went about his life as though nothing had happened. On July the 19th, 6 days after Salisha was last seen, Simbu placed a call to 911 at the request of Salisha's mother, who was calling from Guyana, desperately trying to understand where her daughter was, pushing Simbu to do something to make some kind of official report. He called the police. He reported his wife missing. Let that sit for just a moment. The mother of the woman who had disappeared had to pressure her son-in-law to report it. She was the one pushing from thousands of miles away, unable to get on a plane and walk the streets of Queens herself, unable to physically knock on doors and demand answers. She was dependent on the one person who already knew the truth, and that person needed to be pressured before he picked up the phone. The missing persons case was opened. And then, on the surface, everything went quiet. For the next 2 months, Salisha Ali's mother waited. Her name, her phone calls, her messages into the void, all of it going unanswered. All of it met with the same suffocating silence that had started on July the 14th, when Salisha did not show up for work and the phone stopped ringing. This is the part of the story that does not get talked about enough in true crime coverage, the waiting. The people left behind in a missing persons case don't just experience a single devastating moment. They experience weeks and months of sustained uncertainty. Every morning they wake up and the absence is still there. Every time the phone rings, there's a half second of hope before reality resets. Every conversation is shadowed by the question underneath everything else. Where is she? Salisha's mother was living that reality from another continent. She had no resources to mount a physical search. She had no connections inside the NYPD. She had nothing but her own love and her own terror and the phone that kept connecting her to a man who, according to the charges filed against him, had already committed the worst possible act against her daughter. Because here's the part that makes this case particularly haunting. While Salisha's mother was holding on from Guyana, trying to make sense of the silence, Rupchan Simbu was right there. Accessible, answering when she called, present, and by all accounts, he did not behave like a grieving husband. He behaved like a man with nothing to worry about. Neighbor Terrence Dwerica watched from across the street during those months and later described what he saw to reporters. He was back doing his normal, regular thing. Going to work, hanging out, living his life, Dwerica said. He never did anything different after the police came. He went on living his life the same way. Nothing changed. Nothing changed. A man whose wife was missing, whose wife was the subject of an open police investigation, and nothing about his visible daily routine shifted. No visible anguish. No sleepless eyes. No searching. Just the same porch. The same routine. The same undisturbed life. That kind of stillness in a person who should have been devastated is something investigators and criminologists have documented repeatedly in cases involving intimate partner homicide. The absence of visible grief is not proof of guilt on its own, but paired with everything else that was building in this case, the GPS data, the physical evidence, the timeline, it would become one more detail that pointed unmistakably in one direction. Meanwhile, detectives were working. They were building. They were not done. September the 22nd, 2025, 7:02 in the morning. Two New York City Department of Sanitation workers were assigned to a cleanup route that ran through a section of wooded, marshy land near 149th Avenue and Brookville Boulevard in the Rosedale neighborhood of Queens, a quiet corner of the borough that borders Idlewild Park, sitting low and flat in the shadow of JFK Airport. The route was routine. The morning was unremarkable, until one of the workers noticed something on the ground near the tree line. A blue and black moving blanket, the kind sold at hardware stores and used by movers to protect furniture. It was tied shut with yellow rope. Something bulky was packed inside. They moved closer. The smell hit them before they could process what they were looking at. And when they opened that blanket, the morning was no longer routine. Inside was a human torso. Female. Dismembered. The head removed. Both arms gone. Both legs severed. Just the torso, the core of a human body. Wrapped in plastic, and that moving blanket tied with yellow rope, and left in the dirt near a wooded stretch of Queens that most people drove past every day without ever stopping. The workers called it in immediately. NYPD responded. Detectives were on scene. The area was secured, and the investigation that followed would ultimately require the full resources of the Queens District Attorney's Homicide Bureau and the NYPD's Detective Division, working in coordination to piece together what had happened and who was responsible. But in that first moment, standing over the remains of a woman whose name they did not yet know, investigators were working with what they had in front of them. And what they had were tattoos. NYPD Chief of Detectives Joseph Kinney later described the condition of the remains and the significance of what investigators found. Despite the decomposition, the tattoos on the torso were still visible, still readable. 3 names and a flower. We could still see and make out very clearly the tattoos that were on the body, Chief Kinney said, which were 3 names and a flower. Those tattoos, those permanent marks that a woman had chosen to put on her own body, marks that carried the names of the people she loved most, became the thread that would identify her. Forensic analysis confirmed what the investigators were building toward. The remains belonged to Salisha Ali, the same Salisha Ali whose husband had filed a missing persons report 2 months earlier. The same Salisha Ali whose mother had been calling from Guyana. The same Salisha Ali who had not shown up for her job in Brooklyn on the morning of July the 14th. She had been here the entire time. 68 days. In that wooded stretch of land near the airport. While her family waited and called and hoped and told themselves that maybe she was okay, maybe she would reach out, maybe there was an explanation that would make the silence make sense. There was no explanation. There was only this. And now the case had a name. The moment Salisha Ali's remains were identified, the investigation shifted. This was no longer a missing persons case. This was a homicide investigation, and a name at the center of it. The last person confirmed to have been with her, the person who had filed the missing persons report, the person who was still living in the house she had shared, was Rupchan Simbu. Detectives began pulling the threads. The first thread was the Life 360 application on Simbu's phone. Life 360 is a family location sharing app. Millions of people use it. Parents use it to keep track of their children. Adult children use it to keep tabs on aging parents. Couples use it to share their whereabouts in real time. The app runs in the background of a phone and continuously logs GPS coordinates, building a detailed location history that can be accessed and reviewed. Rupchan Simbu had this app on his phone, and that app had been running on July the 14th and 15th, 2025, the 2 days immediately following the last evening Salisha was seen alive. When investigators pulled that data, the picture it painted was unambiguous. On July the 14th, Simbu's GPS coordinates placed him at the Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge, the remote wooded and marshy area off Cross Bay Boulevard near the North Channel Bridge in Broad Channel, an isolated, heavily vegetated stretch of protected land that borders dark water on multiple sides. A place where you could move without being seen. A place where the ground is soft and the undergrowth is thick and the sound of the city barely reaches. He was there. His phone confirmed it. The timestamps were recorded. On July the 15th, his coordinates placed him at the area near 149th Avenue and Brookville Boulevard, the exact location where 2 months later, sanitation workers would find Salisha's torso. 2 sites, 2 consecutive days, the day after and the day after that, after his wife was last confirmed alive. This was not coincidence. Prosecutors would later argue that these coordinates placed Simbu at both body disposal sites on the very days he was allegedly disposing of them. The Life 360 data gave investigators direction. It told them where to look, and what they found when they looked would prove to be some of the most damning physical evidence in the case. The search warrants came next, when detectives executed a search warrant on the home at 135th Street in South Ozone Park, the home where Salisha and Simbu had lived together. They were looking for anything that connected the residents to the crime scenes. They found it. Inside the home, investigators recovered plastic wrap and yellow rope. That yellow rope was sent to the NYPD laboratory for analysis. The results that came back were significant. The rope found inside Rupchan Simbu's home was determined by laboratory examination to be consistent with the yellow rope that had been used to bind Salisha Ali's torso inside that blue and black moving blanket. The same rope, sitting in his house, not disposed of, not hidden in any meaningful way. Just there, as though the man who allegedly used it to wrap up his wife's dismembered remains had walked back through the front door, put it down somewhere, and carried on with his day. But the home search was not the only search conducted. A second search warrant was executed, this time at Simbu's work garage. And inside that garage, investigators found a blue and black moving blanket, not similar to the one wrapping Salisha's torso. Not the same color and general design. Identical. According to the charges in the investigation, the moving blanket recovered from Simbu's work garage was identical to the moving blanket that had been used to wrap Salisha Ali's remains near Idlewild Park. Think about the picture that builds from these three pieces of physical evidence taken together. Yellow rope in the house, an identical moving blanket in the garage, and GPS data placing the man at both disposal sites on the relevant dates. Prosecutors would later say that Simbu had gone to extraordinary lengths to evade responsibility for the killing, discarding the remains in remote locations, spreading them across 2 different areas of Queens. But the one thing he had not done was get rid of the materials he had used. Whether that was arrogance, a belief that he would never be found, that no one would connect the dots, or whether it was simply a failure to think through the details, the result was the same. The evidence that built the case against him was sitting in his own home, in his own garage, waiting for the moment investigators came looking. And investigators did come looking. As the physical evidence was being cataloged and analyzed, the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner was doing its own work. The remains recovered near Idlewild Park on September the 22nd were submitted for forensic analysis. The examiner's office worked to confirm identification, which, as Chief of Detectives Kenny had noted, was accomplished in part through the distinctive tattoos on the torso. 3 names and a flower. Permanent marks that outlasted the violence done to Salisha Ali's body and ultimately helped give her back her name. The medical examiner's investigation continued in the months that followed. The manner of death was examined. The condition of the remains was assessed. And in January of 2026, more than 6 months after Salisha Ali was last seen alive, the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner issued a formal ruling. Homicidal violence. Her death was ruled a homicide. The specifics of how she died were not released publicly, and the case has not yet gone to trial, so those details have not been aired in open court. What was established on the official record was that this woman's death was not accidental. It was not self-inflicted. It was not unexplained. Someone killed Salisha Ali. That ruling in January of 2026 moved the investigation to a different level of urgency. The medical examiner had now put it in writing. This was a murder. And the body of evidence accumulating around Rupchan Simbu was growing too substantial to ignore. The Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge. If you have never been to this part of Queens, let me put it in context for you. It is a federally protected area, part of the Gateway National Recreation Area, sitting in the southern reaches of the borough, surrounded by water, accessible via Cross Bay Boulevard. It is a place of genuine natural beauty. Migratory birds, wetlands, trails, the kind of urban wilderness that reminds you that New York City is not just concrete and skyscrapers. It is also, in the areas away from the main trails, a place of dense vegetation and soft ground. A place where you could go and not be observed. A place that a person planning to dispose of something or someone might consider. Rupchan Simbu's Life 360 data had placed him at the Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge on July the 14th, the day after Salisha was last seen alive. For months, investigators held that information. They knew where he had been. They knew what the GPS coordinates showed. And when the medical examiner formally ruled Salisha's death a homicide in January of 2026, The decision was made to act on what that data was telling them. Detectives organized a search of the wooded area within the Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge near the North Channel Bridge, focusing on the coordinates that corresponded to Simbu's Life 360 location history from July the 14th. On the evening of March the 5th, 2026, nearly 8 months after Salisha Ali was last seen alive, that search produced a discovery. Her head was found at approximately 10:30 in the evening on March the 5th inside the Wildlife Refuge. In the area investigators had targeted based on the GPS data, Salisha Ali's remains were located. The following day, March the 6th, the search continued. Additional remains were recovered. Her legs, or her arms. The Office of the Chief Medical Examiner conducted forensic analysis on each recovered set of remains and confirmed that they all belonged to the same victim, Salisha Ali, whose torso had been found near Idlewild Park in September, had also been left in the Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge. Her remains had been separated and left in 2 different locations across Queens, miles apart, as though distance alone could ensure she was never fully found, never fully identified, never fully returned to the people who loved her. But she was found, all of her, and the case against the man prosecutors believed had put her there was now complete enough to move. March the 11th, 2026. 8 months and 26 days since the evening of July the 13th. Law enforcement arrived at the house on 135th Street in South Ozone Park. The same house where Salisha Ali had once lived, where she had gone to sleep at night in a country she was still learning to call home, where she had kept her things, built her small daily routines, prepared for her shifts at the job in Brooklyn she was working toward a future with. Rupchan Simbu was at that address when investigators arrived. He was taken into custody. He was transported to the 116th Precinct Station House, where he was formally charged by the Queens District Attorney's Office. Queens District Attorney Melinda Katz made the announcement publicly and stated clearly what the charges against him represented. As alleged, the defendant went to extraordinary lengths to evade responsibility for the brutal killing of his wife, discarding her remains in remote locations and concealing critical evidence in an apparent effort to cover up this horrific crime. DA Katz said, "Were it not for the diligence of New York City sanitation workers, who discovered the remains and promptly notified authorities, the victims' loved ones might still be searching." She went further. "My thoughts are with Salisha Ali's family and friends as we work to ensure that the defendant is held fully accountable." The charges filed against Rupchan Simbu were murder in the second degree, 2 counts of concealment of a human corpse, 2 counts of tampering with physical evidence, and obstructing governmental administration. Each charge carried its own weight and its own piece of the story. The murder charge, for what prosecutors allege he did to Salisha on the evening of July the 13th. The concealment charges, for the disposal of her remains in 2 separate remote locations across Queens. The tampering charges, for the materials used to bind and wrap her body, and the deliberate efforts to prevent her from being identified and linked back to him. The obstruction charge, for the missing persons report filed on July the 19th that sent investigators looking in the wrong direction while he carried on living his life. Simbu was arraigned that same night before Queens Criminal Court Judge Sharifa Nasser Quayar. He was remanded into custody without bail, and he entered a plea of not guilty to all charges. The criminal complaint filed at arrest was just the beginning. In the weeks that followed, the Queens District Attorney's Office presented the evidence to a grand jury, a panel of ordinary citizens who review the evidence in a case and determine whether there is sufficient grounds to formally indict the defendant and proceed to trial. On April the 17th, 2026, Rupchan Simbu was formally indicted by that grand jury. He appeared before Queens Supreme Court Justice Usher Pundit Durant for his arraignment on the indictment. The charges on the indictment were murder in the second degree and 2 counts of tampering with physical evidence. Justice Pundit Durant remanded Simbu into custody without bail, meaning he will remain incarcerated as the case moves forward. He is not going home while he awaits trial. He is not sitting on a porch somewhere going about his regular life. He is in custody, facing the full weight of a murder prosecution in the Queens Supreme Court. His next scheduled court appearance is June the 5th, 2026. If Rupchan Simbu is convicted of murder in the second degree, he faces a sentence of up to 25 years to life in prison. The case is being prosecuted by Assistant District Attorney Eric Weinstein of the Queens District Attorney's Homicide Bureau, with the assistance of Assistant District Attorney Antonio Vitilio, under the supervision of Bureau Chief John Kaczynski, Deputy Bureau Chiefs Karen Ross and Jonathan Selko, and under the overall supervision of Executive Assistant District Attorney for Major Crimes Sean Clark. That is a full prosecutorial team assembled to bring this case to trial. That is the weight of the Queen's DA's office committed to pursuing justice for Salisha Ali. Throughout all of this, the disappearance, the discovery, the investigation, the arrest, life on 135th Street in South Ozone Park kept moving. Neighbors went to work. Children played in driveways. The rhythms of a residential Queens block continued undisturbed around a house that was holding the center of one of the borough's most disturbing homicide cases. And one of those neighbors was watching. Terrence Dwerica lived directly across the street from the house where Simbu was renting the first floor. He had been a neighbor long enough to have observed the couple during the summer months, to have seen Salisha Ali on that porch, existing in her life, being present in the neighborhood she had moved into. And then he observed her absence. Dwerica spoke to reporters after the arrest and described what those months had looked like from across the street. His account is one of the most chilling elements of this entire case. Not because of anything dramatic, but because of how ordinary it all was. He noted that after Salisha disappeared, after the police came and went, after the investigation quietly unfolded in the background, Rupchan Simbu just kept living. He was back doing his normal, regular thing. Going to work, hanging out, living his life. Dwerica told Spectrum News New York 1. He never did anything different after the police came. He went on living his life the same way. Nothing changed. Nothing changed. In the weeks after a woman he was married to disappeared. In the months after sanitation workers found her torso 2 miles from their home. Through the winter, while the medical examiner was conducting analysis and detectives were building a case. Through the early spring, when investigators were searching the Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge based on the GPS data from his own phone. Nothing changed. Dwerica also recalled seeing them together before everything fell apart. The porch, the summer evenings. 2 people sharing the kind of ordinary domestic scene that tells neighbors nothing about what is happening behind closed doors. I'd usually see them around summer, he said. They'd be hanging out around the porch. That image, a couple on a porch, Queen's summer, evening light, is one of the starkest contrasts in this entire case. Because standing in front of it was a woman who had crossed an ocean to build a better life, who had a job and plans and children waiting for her back home, who had 3 names tattooed on her body because she carried the people she loved literally written on her skin. And sitting next to her was the man who, according to prosecutors, would take everything from her before that summer was over. It is worth pausing on the Life 360 application, because in the history of this case, that app is arguably the single most important piece of evidence. And the story of how it functioned in this investigation says something important about the world we live in now. Life 360 is not a surveillance tool used by law enforcement. It is not a tracking device installed by investigators. It is a consumer application, available in any app store, downloaded voluntarily, designed for families to share their locations with each other. It was built so that a parent can look at their phone and know their teenager made it to school. So that an adult child can check in on an aging parent. So that couples who want that layer of transparency can share their whereabouts without having to text every time they move. Rupchan Simbu had this app on his phone. Whether Salisha had asked him to install it, or whether he had chosen to install it himself, or whether it had been on the phone for unrelated reasons, the app was running. And it was logging. On July the 14th, the app recorded that Simbu's phone was at the Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge. On July the 15th, the app recorded that his phone was at the area near 149th Avenue and Brookville Boulevard. Both of those GPS records existed because a piece of software was doing what it was designed to do, quietly, automatically, without any human directing it. The app had no idea that the person carrying the phone was allegedly in the process of disposing of a murder victim's remains. It was just doing its job, logging coordinates, keeping a record, and those records, months later, handed investigators a map. DA Melinda Katz said it plainly in her statement after the arrest. The analysis and the investigation that led to his arrest were only possible using modern tools and data collection. Modern tools and data collection. A family location sharing app became the thread that connected a defendant to 2 crime scenes. There's something almost poetic about that, and not in a comfortable way. The technology that is woven into our daily lives, that we use without thinking, that runs quietly in the background of our phones. It records. It remembers. And in a case where investigators had no eyewitness, no confession, no one who could step forward and say they saw what happened, the record kept by an app became the most powerful voice in the room. Salisha Ali could not speak for herself anymore. But the data on the phone in her killer's pocket could. And it did. There are cases you cover, and then there are cases that cover you. The story of Salisha Ali is the second kind. Because at every level, From the circumstances of how she came to be in that house in South Ozone Park, to the isolation that followed, to the months her family spent waiting with no answers. This case is not just a crime story. It is a story about the systems that surround people who are trying to build better lives in a foreign country. It is a story about the way vulnerability can be exploited by the very person who is supposed to protect you. Salisha Ali was 33 years old. She was a mother of 3. She moved to America on the foundation of a marriage to a man who could sponsor her immigration. That is not unusual. Millions of people have come to this country through exactly this pathway. Marriage-based immigration is a legal, legitimate process, and the vast majority of people who use it do so in good faith. But when the person on the other end of that arrangement is not acting in good faith, when the person holding the sponsorship understands that their partner's legal status in the country is tied to them, the dynamic that exists inside that home is not a partnership. It is a power imbalance of an almost total kind. Think about what Salisha's situation meant in practical terms. She was in a foreign country. English may or may not have been her first language in the sense of navigating American bureaucracy. She did not have years of established life in the United States. She did not have an independent network of support in Queens. Her mother was in Guyana. Her children were in Guyana. The people who would have stood in that house and said enough, the ones who would have driven to Queens and packed her bags and said we were leaving right now, were all thousands of miles away. She had a job in Brooklyn. That thread to the outside world existed. And that matters because it tells us that Salisha was actively trying to build the independence she needed. She was not passive. She was not simply accepting whatever was handed to her. She was working. But a job in Brooklyn does not neutralize the reality of returning every evening to a home where the balance of power was that unequal. A paycheck does not automatically translate into the kind of financial and social safety net that makes leaving a dangerous domestic situation feel like a real option. We will not speculate beyond what the record shows. What the record shows is a woman who came to America looking for a future for her children, who worked hard, who stayed in contact with her family, who, according to the charges filed against her husband, was killed by the very person she had built that future around. And what the record also shows is that after her death, her family spent months not knowing she was gone. Months holding on to a silence they had no way to interpret. Months waiting for a phone call that was never coming. That is its own particular kind of grief, and it deserves to be named. If you are watching this, and you are in a situation where your immigration status is tied to someone who is controlling, isolating, or threatening you, there's help that does not require you to have independent legal status. The National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233 can provide guidance regardless of your citizenship situation. You do not have to be documented to deserve safety. You do not have to be a citizen to deserve protection. Salisha Ali deserved protection. She deserved to get off that plane and find exactly what she had been promised. She did not. There are 3 children somewhere in Guyana who grew up knowing their mother got on a plane to give them a better life. 3 kids who were waiting for her to call and say it was time. Time to come over, time to start the next chapter, time to be a family in the same country again. Those 3 children are still waiting. Not for that call anymore. For something else entirely. For the world to look them in the face and say that what happened to their mother mattered. That she was not just a statistic in a crime report. That she was not just a victim in a case number. That she was their mother and she loved them. And she had their names written on her skin so that she never went a single day without carrying them with her. 3 names and a flower. That is how investigators identified Salisha Ali. That is how her story got a name. And it is fitting, in the most heartbreaking way, that the thing that ultimately gave her back her identity was the proof she carried of how deeply she loved. The names of her children, tattooed on a body that was found in a wooded patch of Queens because someone decided her life was worth less than his freedom. Her mother, still in Guyana, still living with the loss of a daughter who went to America and never came home, is the other human anchor of this story. The woman who called from thousands of miles away, who pushed Simbu to file a missing persons report because she had no other lever to pull, who spent months in the particular suspended grief of not knowing, hoping against hope that the silence had an explanation that was not the worst one. There is no clean ending for a parent in that situation. There is no resolution that puts the world back the way it was before the phone stopped ringing. What there is, what justice in a court of law can actually deliver, is a record. An official acknowledgement that this woman existed, that her life had value, that what was done to her was seen and prosecuted and answered for. A record that says, Salisha Ali was here. She mattered, and the person charged with taking her life will stand in front of a court and answer for it. That is what the trial of Rupchan Simbu means. That is what June the 5th, 2026 means. The next scheduled court date, where this case will take its next step toward whatever verdict a jury ultimately delivers. As of today, Rupchan Simbu is held without bail in New York City custody. He has been formally indicted by a Queens grand jury on charges of murder in the second degree and 2 counts of tampering with physical evidence. He was arraigned on that indictment on April the 17th, 2026, before Queens Supreme Court Justice Usher Pundit Durant. He has pleaded not guilty to all charges. His next court appearance is scheduled for June the 5th, 2026. If convicted of murder in the second degree, he faces a sentence of up to 25 years to life in prison. Given that Rupchan Simbu is 75 years old, a sentence of that length, if imposed, would in all realistic probability mean he dies in custody. The prosecution team at the Queens District Attorney's Homicide Bureau is building toward trial. The evidence they have publicly documented is substantial. GPS coordinates from his own phone, placing him at both disposal sites on the relevant dates. Physical materials recovered from his home and garage that forensic analysis linked to the crime scenes, and a medical examiner's ruling of homicidal violence. There is no publicly known defense strategy at this time. His attorney had not made a statement to the press as of the reports available at the time of this recording. What is known is that he entered not guilty pleas and is being held without bail. This case is not over. The verdict has not been delivered, and shadow case files will be here when it is. When the jury files back into that courtroom in Queens and the foreperson stands up and reads the verdict, we will cover it. We will tell you what happened, what it means, and what Salisha Ali's family said when they heard it. Subscribe right now and turn on notifications so that when that video goes up, you're the first to know. This story is not finished. For clarity, for the record, and for every person who wants to understand this case from beginning to end, here is the complete verified timeline of the Salisha Ali case. 2023. Rupchan Simbu visits Trinidad and Tobago. He meets Salisha Ali, a 33-year-old Guyanese mother of 3. A relationship begins. 2024. Salisha Ali moved from Guyana to South Ozone Park, Queens, New York. She moves into the home Simbu is renting on 135th Street. They marry that same year. She finds a job in Brooklyn. July the 13th, 2025, evening. According to the charges and investigation, Rupchan Simbu and Salisha Ali are both present in the home on 135th Street. This is the last confirmed moment Salisha Ali is seen alive. July the 14th, 2025, Salisha Ali does not appear for her job in Brooklyn. Family members cannot reach her. According to Life 360 GPS data, Simbu's phone places him at the Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge near the North Channel Bridge in Broad Channel. July the 15th, 2025, Life 360 GPS data places Simbu's phone near 149th Avenue and Brookville Boulevard in the Rosedale area of Queens. July the 19th, 2025, at the request of Salisha's mother, Rupchan Simbu calls 911 and files a missing persons report for his wife. September the 22nd, 2025, approximately 7 in the morning. 2 New York City Department of Sanitation workers discover a blue and black moving blanket tied with yellow rope in a wooded area near 149th Avenue and Brookville Boulevard. Inside is a female torso. The area is secured and investigators are called to the scene. September to October 2025, forensic analysis is conducted on the remains. The victim is identified through distinctive tattoos, 3 names, and a flower, as Salisha Ali. A search warrant is issued and executed at Simbu's home on 135th Street. Plastic wrap and yellow rope are recovered. Laboratory analysis determines the rope is consistent with the rope used to bind the torso. A second search warrant is executed at Simbu's work garage. A moving blanket identical to the one found at the crime scene is recovered. October 2025, Rupchan Simbu is arrested for a separate incident, a dispute at a restaurant. This represents his only prior arrest on record. January 2026. The Office of the Chief Medical Examiner formally rules Salisha Ali's death a homicide. Manner of death is determined to be homicidal violence. March the 5th, 2026. Approximately 10:30 in the evening. Based on GPS coordinates from Simbu's Life 360 data from July the 14th, investigators search a wooded area within the Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge near the North Channel Bridge off Cross Bay Boulevard in Broad Channel. Salisha Ali's head is discovered. March the 6th, 2026. The search of the Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge continues. Additional remains are recovered. her legs, and one arm. Forensic analysis confirms all remains belong to Salisha Ali. March the 11th, 2026. Rupchan Simbu is arrested at the residence on 135th Street in South Ozone Park. He is taken to the 116th Precinct Station House. He is charged with murder in the second degree, 2 counts of concealment of a human corpse, 2 counts of tampering with physical evidence, and obstructing governmental administration. He is arraigned before Queen's Criminal Court Judge Sharifa Nasser Koyar and remanded without bail. He pleads not guilty. April the 17th, 2026. Rupchan Simbu is formally indicted by Queen's grand jury. He is arraigned on the indictment before Queen's Supreme Court Justice Usher Pundit Durant, who remands him into custody without bail. He is ordered to return to court on June the 5th. June the 5th, 2026. Next scheduled court appearance. Salisha Ali was 33 years old. She was a daughter, a mother, a woman who got on a plane because she believed in what was waiting on the other side of that flight. She worked. She planned. She stayed in contact with the people she loved. She wore their names on her body so that she was never, not for a single day, separated from the people she was doing all of this for. She did not get to bring her children over. She did not get to call her mother and say it was finally time. She did not get to sit on a porch in Queens on a summer evening with the knowledge that everything she had sacrificed had been worth it. What she got instead was betrayal from the one person in that country who was supposed to stand beside her. And then 8 months of silence while the people who loved her waited. If there is one thing I need you to take from this case, from Salish Ali's story, it is this. Isolation is a weapon. Distance is a weapon. When the only person a woman has access to in a foreign country is the person who is harming her, when her family is thousands of miles away and her immigration status is tied to the man in her home, the architecture of a trap has already been built. It does not announce itself. It does not look dangerous from the outside. It looks like a couple on a porch on a summer evening. But inside that house, behind that ordinary picture, a woman was cut off from every resource she would need to get out. Salisha tried to build her own thread to the outside world. She found a job in Brooklyn. She was working. She was doing everything right. It was not enough. And that is the part that we cannot simply move past. Because there are women in situations right now, in Queens, in every borough, in every city and town in this country, who are navigating exactly the kind of isolation that Salisha navigated, who are far from family, whose legal status is tied to someone who means them harm, who have found their own threads to the outside world and are hanging on. If you know someone in that situation, be the thread that holds. Call, check in, show up. Do not accept the explanation that she has moved on, that she is cutting people off, that she has chosen to disappear. Push, ask questions, make noise, because the silence that surrounds a woman in that kind of danger is not her silence. It is the silence being built around her by someone else. Salisha Ali deserved better than what was waiting for her in South Ozone Park. She deserved to make it home. We say her name because she deserves to be remembered as exactly who she was, not as a victim in a case file, not as a body found in a park, but as a mother of 3 who loved so deeply she carried her children's names tattooed on her skin. Salisha Ali. Say her name. Rest in peace. Before you go, if this story moved you, if you felt something watching it, if you want to make sure stories like Salisha's are heard, hit the like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it tells YouTube that this story matters and deserves to be seen by more people. Drop a comment below. Tell me what moment in this case stopped you. Tell me what question you still have. I read every single comment on this channel, and your voice is part of why we keep making these videos. And if you're not subscribed to Shadow Case Files yet, right now is the moment. Hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications. The trial of Rupchan Simbu is coming. The verdict is coming. And when it does, you will hear about it here first. There are more stories that live in the shadows. We're not done bringing them into the light.